So this bottle, there's a good reason you've never heard of it. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. Today, 2 tiny bottles at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. I'm here at Multnomah Whiskey Library in Portland, Oregon with Jacob Grier. Jacob, thank you so much for having me around.
Yeah, Tammy, thanks for having me on your show. This is exciting. I love the concept.
Awesome. Can you tell people a little about yourself?
Yeah, so I kind of think of myself as like the substitute teacher here at the Multnomah Whiskey Library. I've bartended here for 7 or 8 years, but these days I'm like the substitute they call in if they need someone to fill in. But I've been a writer as well in the cocktail industry.
And writing, I think, is where I first encountered you and your cocktail recipes.
Yeah.
I teach cocktail classes, and when I talk about beer cocktails, I always reference your first book, which was about beer cocktails.
Right, which we have right here.
Conveniently enough, imagine that.
Yeah, Cocktails on Tap, which sadly is now out of print. So if you're interested in this topic, seek one out, hunt them down. There's a few copies floating around in bookstores these days.
I'm sure you can find it somewhere online. But, so this was when I talked to people about beer and the history of beer in cocktails, and it really was a part of how people made cocktails. Yeah. I always reference your name and give them some of your recipes to try out.
That's awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I knew you from. And then discovered you on Blue Sky. When I migrated my social media presence mostly to Blue Sky, I found you there, and that's where I hit you up to come and taste some bottles.
And here we are.
Yeah. So I sent you the list, and you picked out this Noblesse Canadian whiskey. What was your inspiration? What attracted you to that?
Well, part of it was just that if we're filming at the Whiskey Library, I feel like we should drink whiskey. So there was that aspect. And this was one that I had never even heard of. Like, there were some whiskeys on the list that I had obviously have like current day versions that might be very similar, but this was one that was brand new to me. And I also just feel like Canadian whiskey doesn't get the appreciation it deserves all the time. And it's a category I would love to learn more about. So this was really intriguing.
It is a category I'm definitely getting a deep dive into. My grandmother lived in Ontario, Canada. And so, especially as I've gotten deeper into the collection, I'm pulling out more and more Canadian whiskey. So yeah, it's like all Canadian whiskey all the time in my life right now. So this bottle, there's a good reason you've never heard of it. So this was distilled in 1965. We know this because it has a tax strip on it. Yeah. And it is labeled as a 10-year-old whiskey. So that means it would have been bottled in 1975. And that was about the last year this was available.
Okay. So that's when they make it easy for you to figure out the maths, right?
I really do appreciate that. But that is why I've never heard of it, because it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And even trying to track down the research on it was really tricky. I mean, I found it in newspaper ads and had to guess a lot of things around it. So one of the things that I guessed about it is that the reason it went away in 1975 was to make room for another product, because this is produced by Canadian Gibson Limited. And for people who know Canadian whiskey, Gibson's Finest is one of the brands.
Yeah, that's what I've heard of.
You've heard of that one, right? And so this is a bottle of Gibson's Finest, which also materialized in Grandma's collection. And it's a 12-year-old whiskey. So my theory was that the 10-year-old went away to make room for the 12-year-old, and they brought it under the Gibson's name.
Seems pretty plausible.
Because before that, they had a product called Gibson's 909, which was a 6-year whiskey. But the Noblesse was the best whiskey in the Gibson lineup. And then they're like, all right, let's put our name on it. So I brought both along because I'm really curious about tasting them side by side, in part because this one has a loose ring. All these bottles were supposed to be sealed. My grandmother did not countenance with, drinking the bottles, right? Yeah. If my grandfather took a nip, bottle had to go. She didn't save it. So I don't know when or how this ring got to tap.
It wasn't you on the plane.
Was not me on the plane.
Okay.
So I don't actually know. Is this Gibson's Finest in this bottle or not? No.
Oh, interesting. It could be a sneaky refill.
Could be a sneaky refill.
All right.
Seems highly unlikely, but I don't know.
Could just be innocent damage to the bottle.
Could be.
Could be that, yeah.
Yep. What I do know, though, is that both of these whiskeys, given the time periods involved, should have come out of the Gimli Distillery's Valleyfield Distillery in Quebec.
Okay.
Because Gimli, Canada, was behind Canadian Gibson. And Valleyfield's known for having a very distinctive flavor note. And so what I want us to see is, do we find a similarity between these two bottles?
All right. I'm excited.
All right. So I think we will kick off with the oldest one.
The Noblesse.
The Noblesse. 10-year-old Canadian whiskey, bottled in bond. Easy to get that lid off.
And does it say it's a blend? Is that what it said?
So all Canadian whiskeys are blends in the way we think about them. And really they're blends that are kind of closer to how Scotch is made. So Canadian whiskey typically has a base whiskey, which is distilled to a higher proof and then aged, and then or a variety of base whiskeys, but a higher proof base whiskey and then flavoring whiskeys, which are distilled to a lower proof and usually more malt forward, more rye forward. That's why they were called rye, right? And so every Canadian whiskey, up until recent years anyway, was like a blend of this base whiskey and these flavoring whiskeys in different proportions. And then it's not, I don't think bottled in bond in Canada means season of a particular year.
Like it does here.
Exactly. I don't think it's all 1965, but it could be.
Yeah.
All right.
Just met the taxmen were on it.
Yeah.
It does come across. You can tell it has that higher proof, more neutral whiskey as a base on this.
And that was the Canadian signature, right?
Right.
In 1975, this is a time when there is a lot of Canadian whiskey and Scotch whiskey being sold, but people are kind of starting to get away from whiskey. And so the 70s is this period where they're really trying to market a lighter whiskey. So Canadian whiskey always was like, I think, a little less feisty than bourbon, shall we say.
Yeah, just on the aroma, you can tell this is going to be a little less aggressive.
Yeah. And that's the Canadian signature. Yeah, you definitely get the alcohol.
A little hint of vanilla.
Little hint of vanilla. Yeah, the Canadian whiskeys are really hard for nosing. They're just like, they don't want to give you much at all.
No.
Especially during that time period.
It's like lots of bright high notes on that, like a little bit of a floral quality.
Yep. Again, very light in flavor for sure. In 10 years there, just like in Scotland, that's 10 years in used barrels, right? This isn't new oak.
Right. And you can tell from the color too. It's
yeah.
Kind of like a pale copper, but not super dark.
No. Certainly would have appealed to the palate at the time, right? You want a whiskey that tastes kind of like vodka?
Yeah.
Not a lot. Little caramel, just kind of a hint of it. Remind me, almost like that vanilla.
It's a session whiskey. This is, it's not quite Canada, but I grew up spending summers in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, so almost to Canada. Yeah. And this feels like what you could, drink on the rocks, sitting on the dock.
For sure. This doesn't even have a proof on it.
Okay.
It's old enough bottle that wasn't required.
Probably not super high.
No, probably 40%.
Yeah.
Almost everything in Canada is bottled at 40%. I haven't really been able to try to figure out why. I think it might be a tax thing.
Usually is. It seems like.
All right. So porch whiskey for the summer.
Yeah. I don't dislike it. It's just very straightforward.
Very chill.
Very easy to drink.
All right. So we're supposed to be noticing any particular flavor notes that we might find from Valleyfield to Valleyfield. Oh, this is going to be tricky.
It might be a little tough.
All right.
Yeah, I must get we said floral, but like chamomile.
Chamomile specifically?
Yeah.
That sounds, yeah, and it is coming up a little bit more as it sits. I like that. Chamomile.
Sounds fancier than floral.
Right.
We'll go with
Absolutely. Specificity. All right. So loose ring. But the top feels pretty good. No.
Looks good.
All right. We'll find out. A little bit darker in color.
I noticed that.
2 more years in barrel. This is also from the 80s, as best I can tell. So whiskey tastes might have been changing.
Yep. And it's still very neutral on the aroma.
Yeah. And the new Canadian whiskeys are really interesting because you get a lot more power and a lot more feistiness. They've really been inspired by the resurgence of American whiskey.
Well, I mean, years ago, I got to visit the Crowne Royal distillery in Gimli, Manitoba.
Okay.
And as part of that experience, we got to try some of the flavoring whiskeys, and they were phenomenal. We're like, I wish you would bottle this. I would love to buy a bottle.
Yes, and I actually have in Grandma's collection a bottle of Lot 40 Canadian whiskey, which was basically them doing that for the first time, bottling flavoring whiskey. And Canada did not know what to do with it.
Right.
They were like, and it failed. You know, it came out in 1998 and it disappeared, and then it came back.
Right. A little ahead of its time.
Right, exactly. It came back during sort of the American whiskey revival and found a following.
Should we taste it? Because I don't know if I'm going to get anything off the aroma that's useful.
Nope. It's a little more robustly flavored than the Noblesse.
It's more intense. And maybe it's just because of the cracked seal, but a little oxidation, I think.
The level was still pretty good, but it did have a little bit more air.
It doesn't have the vanilla richness I would have expected, from a whiskey this dark.
Yeah. And that's probably not new charred oak, right? Yeah. I think it's interesting. It's definitely more robust. I feel like it's got more flavoring whiskey, more of that rye component. I am getting some bitey, spicy,
for sure,
rye pepper. But I don't think it's not as nuanced.
It's not. I mean,
not that the Noblesse was tremendously nuanced, but it did have sort of a delicateness that the Gibson's Finest does not.
Yeah, there's a little bit of elegance on that first one.
Right.
Yeah,
especially in comparison.
Right. Yeah, the Noblesse keeps me coming back. Like, I want to pick up the nuances and sit with it a little bit. I feel like this, the 12-year Gibson's Finest, I taste it and I got it, and I'm good.
I want to mix it with Coke.
Right.
Or actually ginger ale. Like, that's how this is drunk in Canada.
Yeah.
Right? All sense. Canadian whiskey. That was my first introduction to, I didn't drink really until I was in my 30s. And, I encountered a cocktail menu and it had a rye cocktail on it, the Scofflaw. Oh, yeah. And I was like, rye, I recognize that. My dad drank rye and ginger. I've had a sip of his rye and ginger. I'll order this. Not realizing American rye, totally different than Canadian rye. And then I fell in love with rye.
Very cool.
It's my favorite whiskey. So this would go well with ginger ale. It would really stand up. Whereas the Noblesse, I think, would kind of disappear a little bit.
It would, yeah.
All right. Well, if there's a Valleyfield connection, I'm not sure I can find it.
It's not super obvious. Doesn't mean it's not there.
So when you visited the Crowne Royal plant, was there anything that struck you about that visit?
So it was a lot. There were two things that were really cool. One is they basically have an airtight seal on their whiskey rick houses. And so the idea is to keep the vapors in. And when they open the doors, they actually had to take a reading of the air to make sure it was safe to go in. They made us take off any electronics, the cell phones, leave them outside. We didn't want any sparks. And when you walked into this warehouse, I've never had this experience of like, it hurt to breathe. Like your throat catches because there's just so much alcohol vapor in the air and you have to adjust and like take shallow breaths and like figure out how to be in this environment.
Wow.
And then we tasted from a barrel in that room, which was a very cool experience.
I'm sure.
And, we're tasting the very flavorful whiskeys at full proof, 120 proof or so. Super cool. The other more showy thing about it was at the end of the tour, and we're in like very remote Manitoba.
Yeah.
They said we want to make sure you get the full experience, so we have one last surprise for you. We want to make sure you see the distillery from above, so we're getting in a helicopter, and we took a big loop around Gimli, Manitoba, which was really cool.
It's probably the only helicopter and distillery tour you have had.
It is, yeah. But it was fun. It's an Icelandic settlement, which is also really interesting. So the streets have like Icelandic names. There's a huge lake. Like it feels very Icelandic when you're there.
Go back to the Noblesse.
Yeah.
It smells really good now. I'm actually getting some quite nice aroma on the Noblesse.
Yeah, I mean that one's really fun.
It's been a little bit the way I've experienced some of these bottles is they do kind of open up. I had a brandy that I tasted that was kind of nothing at the beginning and then got really interesting. This still doesn't taste like much, but it's definitely appreciated the Glencairn glass and kind of collecting those aromas a little bit.
It needed a little time.
Yeah.
But it's complex. Like this has layers.
Mm-hmm.
Like it does keep bringing you back to it to explore a little bit. You know, not just throw it back and ignore it. Whereas I don't get that with this other one with the Gibson's Finest.
Yeah. All right. Although even that one's gotten a little bit more interesting on the nose. Well,
Kind of leathery, like old leather. Maybe pick up on that on the Gibsons.
sure. It's very charitable of you. I get that. It definitely smells better than it tastes. Both of these. Both of these. So this is, I guess the takeaway I'm going to say is spend some time smelling your whiskey. Don't just drink it because sometimes most of the pleasure is in the nose. Anything else you want to tell people?
Oh, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I should say, there is that. I was going to say, I'd like to explore more Canadian whiskey. I would say that. But yes, you've also tasted with my friend Brett, who's curated here. But we do have one other book together. Well, one other book. The first one we've written together, Raising the Bar. Anyone who makes cocktails at home, this is why we wrote this book. It helps you stock your bar one bottle at a time. Really fun concept. And so it's recipes you can make. If you follow an order, you'll always have the ingredients. There's not like wild infusions and crazy preparations you need to do.
Yeah, it's awesome. I get people asking me all the time, you know, what bottles should I buy for my bar? And I was like, well, find a drink that you like and then figure out what else you want to make with that bottle. And if you need another bottle to make that drink, buy that bottle and then figure out what to do with that bottle.
Right.
And so your book, it sounds like, gives people a structured path for doing that instead of them just having to figure it out on their own.
Because I'm sure you've had the experience of buying a bottle for one recipe and then you think, well, now what else do I do with it? You know, I use a 1/4 ounce. I can make this one cocktail 100 times, or I need to find something else that I can make.
Right. And during COVID, I was teaching a new cocktail class every week for over a year. And I would introduce, I wasn't doing one at a time like you guys were, but I would introduce some oddball product like allspice strands, around Christmas. And then I'd make sure I brought some other cocktails back with it, over the next few months. So people would feel like, okay, even if I didn't buy it for that class, I'll buy it now and I can go back and make that drink. And so, creating those on-ramps for people.
Right. We need bottles like this size, these mini bottles of allspice dram.
Yes.
I don't need the 750 milliliter bottle for my home bar.
We need this size of creme de violette because that is a lifetime supply.
Right.
All right. Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn?
Well, we're both on Blue Sky.
We are.
Elon Musk killed X, so we are on Blue Sky.
The skies are blue or on Blue Sky, so you should come find us there.
Right. I also have a platform called Seabird that I actually helped make, which is a link sharing platform. And
the opposite of modern social media, which has been trying to discourage link sharing.
Right.
Yeah.
So we embrace that. And so I go by just my name on there, Instagram, my website.
Excellent.
All the handles the same.
Awesome. And that is at Jacob Grier?
Yes.
Okay. And you will find me at My Tiny Bottles on Instagram and Facebook. And you'll find me at TammyLC on Blue Sky. Please like, subscribe, share. If you're a Canadian whiskey fan, leave a comment. If you're a Canadian whiskey hater, leave a comment. We want to hear from you. And you can find me at mytinybottles.com as well. And cheers.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This was really fun and great to meet in person.
Absolutely.
Great internet friends for so long.
Definitely.